And Gustavo should be president of the United States. Gustavo came to America 30 years ago, didn't speak a word of English, worked every menial job on the planet, invested all of his money in real estate. 30 years later, he's worth about $40 million. Just a great guy. It's very important to me that everybody has one clear offer. And so his offer, you'll love this, Zarina. So he has a 4-month real estate coaching program for $40,000. But I told him exactly what I'll tell you and your audience. There's 2 ways you get better at speaking. First of all, you got to watch lots of speakers. I watch politicians. I watch comedians. Gustavo was going on a podcast that night. And I said, Gustavo, you got to practice. I want you to make the offer tonight. And I want you to call me tomorrow. He calls me the next day, Zarina. He's like, Danny, you're a genius. I'm like, did you make your pitch? He's like, yes. I'm like, did you sell any? He's like, 23.
I'm launching a new show called The Capital Playbook. It's all about real conversations with top VCs, angels, and capital brokers. How they invest, what they're looking for, and where the smartest deals are happening. If you want to be a guest, feature a topic at grownlearn.org/guest-form. You can also find the link in the description box below. The Capital Playbook drops soon. Let's get into it. Today I'm speaking to Danny Brassell. We're going to be speaking about how to craft magnetic presentations, why this is important for entrepreneurs, and whatever else comes up, maybe something shocking. He's known as the Jim Carrey of the speaking business. I want to know why. You do look a little bit like Jim Carrey, by the way.
Thank you.
You have a lot of credentials. You've been a professor at a university. No need to really enumerate all the credentials. Anybody can look you up, and I'm going to let this talk speak for itself, for yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Zarina. More importantly, thanks for all you're doing to spread some joy in the world. We need a lot more of you. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So tell me about the Jim Carrey character first. Is it because you do look a little bit like Jim Carrey, or is it because of your sense of humor?
Yeah, it's a sense of humor. A workshop attendee, she said I was Jim Carrey with a Ph.D. And my coaching clients, one of the reasons, I think one of the things that separates me from a lot of these coaches that show people how to create more engaging presentations is most people will try and push you to tell the most dramatic and tragic story of your life. And I'm completely the opposite. And there's 3 reasons for that. First of all, the world just survived a global pandemic. We don't need to hear another sad story. Everybody's had bad things happen to them. I think we need more stories of hope. Second of all, what I'm teaching my clients to do is to create what I call a well-crafted story. When I was a journalist 30 years ago covering the president, he called it a stump speech. In superhero movies, they call it an origin story. You can call it peanut butter and jelly. What this is this is a speech that you're going to deliver again and again to new audiences to introduce yourself to those audiences. And so if you're telling a sad story, do you really want to tell that sad story again and again and again? I mean, I have a friend and his daughter was murdered in a school shooting, and he's delivered that speech over 1,000 times. I mean, I don't know how he does it. I could never do that, talk about the worst day of my life. And third, and this is where people get angry with me, I have one objective when I'm on stage. I want you to leave feeling better than when you came in. I want you laughing, smiling, happy. I personally believe there's something admirable in that as an objective. I believe that the people that tell the same sad story again and again, by the 20th time they're telling that story, now those are crocodile tears, and now they're being manipulative. And I'm not saying it's not an effective sales strategy. It's actually a very effective sales strategy. But I personally don't want to have to take a shower after I get off stage because I just manipulated my audience. There are more ethical ways to get people to want to do business with you. And so I like to incorporate a lot of humor in my presentations. I was working with a client a few weeks ago. He's a computer programmer in Silicon Valley. And let's just say most of the computer industry people I work with are introverted. They're not exactly outgoing. They don't love speaking on stages. And he's Indian and has a very difficult name to pronounce. And he was very worried. He's like, Danny, please make me interesting. And so what we did is we just changed his opening, and I'm not gonna tell you his real name, but he said now he starts off. He says, "Hello, my name is Shubanakar Majahardin. Gee, I sure hope I'm pronouncing that correctly." And it just gets people to smile. And you don't have to be a stand-up comedian. You just need to get your audience to feel like, oh, this is a real person. This person's just like me. They're not a braggart. They have the same problems I have, but they've solved those problems. When you can accomplish that in your presentation, you're going to be much more effective. That's a very long answer to your short question.
Yeah, no, no, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. It gives me straight in step in the door to the next question. Uh, I've been taught by other speaking coaches, like taught, maybe I've listened to them, I can't really remember, but I remember this thing that they always say you should start with your hero story, something that you've overcome, not necessarily a sad thing. Is it still the same type of hook that you're advising people to start with, something that you've overcome?
Well, that's a good story. I mean, the most important thing at the beginning of a presentation, so in our process, everybody has their own process. They're
Yeah.
all the same thing. And so our process, I, my company's Well-Crafted Story Workshop, there's three of us that are co-founders, me, Coach Jimmy Hayes Nelson, and Dave Ward. I call us the professor, the performer, and the producer because my background is in academia. Coach Jimmy used to be on Broadway, and then Dave is an attorney, so he has the legal elements of it. And so our process is 5 C's. You start before you ever write your speech. You have clarity, then you have to connect with your audience, then you teach your content, then you have a clear call to action, and then you have an emotional close to your presentation. So addressing your question, when you're connecting with your audience in the first 5 minutes, it's very important that Jimmy calls it the three gotta. I call it RAP because I used to be a teacher and I have to make everything an acronym or alliterative or something. And so RAP stands for you got to show your audience you're just like them. You got to be relatable.
Mm.
The A stands for authority. You got to show your audience that you've suffered the same problem that they're having, but you've actually overcome that problem. And then you have to show your P, which is your purpose, is you got to show them why this matters to them. And there's lots of different ways. Here, I'll give your audience an exercise I take my clients through is just sit down one day in a comfortable chair with a pen and paper and a libation of choice. And for an hour, I want you to write down every single story that's ever happened to you. And I don't mean the entire story, I just mean triggers, like the time I locked myself out of the car in front of the grocery store, the time dad spilt mustard on his tie at that fancy restaurant. You'll find in about an hour, you can come up with at least 500 stories like this. So that's the first part of the exercise. The second part of the exercise is then I want you to think about what are these stories really about? Oh, well, this is a story about never giving up. Oh, this is a story about loyalty. Oh, this is a story about love. And so on my computer, I literally have hundreds of files with tens of thousands of stories. And so rather than just having random stories, which I see a lot of people do in their presentations, there's actually a purpose behind each story. This is what I want my audience to do. So, for example, I have a presentation where I begin, when I was an elementary school teacher, every other teacher at my school went through hundreds, if not thousands of band-aids every single school year. I mean, kids love band-aids. They work better than smokes on the prison yard. Well, every year I went through exactly one band-aid. And my colleagues always ask me, well, what's your secret? Well, on the first day of school, I always have a chubby little boy. We'll call him Paco. He's picking at a scab all morning. Finally, after lunch, he has success. He starts bleeding, and the annoying little girl next to him raises her hand, wipes her nose, and says, Mr. Marcel, Paco's bleeding. I'm like, oh my gosh, Paco, you know what you need? You need a Band-Aid. Now I have 33 little heads looking at me. I'm like, I got a drawer full of Band-Aids in my desk, and I don't just have ordinary Band-Aids. I have Mighty Morphin Power Ranger Band-Aids, and I'm going to give you the Green Ranger because he's the coolest. Now Paco's smiling, all the kids are grinning. I walk Paco to my desk, I take out the Band-Aids. Oh, before I put on the Band-Aid, we got to clean out the wound. So then I show the kids the clear bottle of rubbing alcohol. I say, Paco, hold on to my hand. This might sting a little bit. I start pouring on the rubbing alcohol. He starts, I put on the Band-Aid. I'm like, great. Anybody else need a Band-Aid? My students can have a skull fracture and they will never ask me for a Band-Aid. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm not going to give you band-aids. I'm going to give you practical strategies on how to create a presentation that converts your audience to become dedicated clients. So you see what I did is I took a story to illustrate the point that I wanted to make. That's what the effective storytellers are doing. And I love that you've listened to a lot of these coaches because I've had that's what I love about your audience. These are people that understand the value of coaching, and that's
That was
that.
quite mesmerizing. That was quite
Thank
mesmerizing.
you. Well,
Yeah.
I never wanted to become a coach because I actually have a very high standard for my students. I actually will not let you fail. I'm on your back until you succeed. It's actually one of the reasons I had to leave teaching because I'm a obsessive compulsive. And what's been wonderful about coaching entrepreneurs and executives and business owners is I find that they're highly motivated people. They actually do what I tell them to do. And that's where I get a lot of people think it's fulfilling just to cash the check from their clients. I'm like, well, yeah, that's definitely fulfilling. But the real fulfillment for me is watching my clients succeed beyond their wildest dreams. And that's what I love. I love seeing people that are nervous become much more confident on stage. I love seeing people that weren't converting audiences that now are getting more. I have one client and he's booked through the end of July. Now he was having difficulty getting clients in his auto program, and now he's got clients through the end of July. He said, I don't even have any time on my schedule. I'm like, well, that's a good problem to have. It's a very different problem than what you used to have.
Yeah.
So I get a lot of joy out of this.
Are most of your clients coaches, or do you have some entrepreneurs, and how do they get on stage? What kind of topics do they speak on? Can you give us a bit of an overview of what this is? Because in my mind, speaking is mostly, how should I say, a filler entertainment for corporate events.
Um, No, that's not the type of person. I work with everybody. I've worked with politicians. I've worked with pastors. I work with tons of entrepreneurs. I work with coaches too, entertainers, famous athletes. Jimmy's the one that likes to say all the names. I like to be a little bit more discreet. I don't like to name my clients because just in case they don't want people knowing that they've worked with a speaking coach. I get it. Maybe they don't want to hear that. And again, what I'm working on with people. So when we're creating what we call our well-crafted story, this is a talk that's flexible enough to be delivered as a 45-minute keynote, or it could be a 20-minute pitch to investors, or it could be a 30-second elevator speech to somebody. I want it to, it can be delivered in a boardroom, in a ballroom, in a courtroom, in a classroom. I had a client, he delivered his talk in a restroom at a urinal to an investor. He washed his hands, but what I love again about the people I'm working with now is I can't say I have one client, he never listens to me, which drives me nuts. And I'm like, as a coach, I'm like, hey, I can tell you, you'll convert more people if you do this. But then there's I give the example, I have this guy, Gustavo, I worked with, now it's about 18 months ago, not this past January, the January before. Oh, I guess that's 16 months. And Gustavo should be president of the United States. Gustavo came to America 30 years ago, didn't speak a word of English, worked every menial job on the planet, invested all of his money in real estate. 30 years later, he's worth about $40 million. Just a great guy. And so his pitch, his offer, I work on the offer. It's very important to me that everybody has one clear offer. And so his offer, you'll love this, Zarina. So he has a 4-month real estate coaching program for $40,000. Now I work on a lot of offers. That's a pretty high ticket offer. But I told him exactly what I'll tell you and your audience. There's two ways you get better at speaking. First of all, you got to watch lots of speakers. I watch politicians. I watch comedians. I watch televangelists. I watch them in front of big groups, in front of small groups, in front of men, in front of women. Here, I'll give your audience a little ninja strategy. I watch a lot of televised award shows. because when the person wins the Academy Award, they only have 45 seconds to connect with their audience. Most people waste their time. They get on stage like, I want to thank God, I want to thank the Academy. It's stupid. Nobody pays attention. But every
Aren't
now
they all
and then,
trained in advance? Aren't their speeches prepared before they?
some of them do,
Yeah.
some of them don't. I mean, and I won't say I've actually worked with some of
Ah,
the good speeches. I've actually worked with some of the people on these
yeah.
things, but most people actually don't. They just get up there and just start thanking
Okay.
everybody they've
Uh-huh.
ever met. But every now and then, a person does a great job. So a few years ago, there was a gentleman by the name of Joe Walker who won the Academy Award for Best Film Editing. Now, Zarina, this is Hollywood. The important people are in the front, the actors. And you can tell none of them care about film editing, and the camera's panning and they're not even paying attention. And Joe Walker gets on stage and he's British and he speaks very slowly and distinctly. He says, a lot of people don't know this, but when phrased properly, the term Academy Award nominee can be used as an insult. Well, now the camera shows the audience, and you see people leaning in, like, what's he talking about? And he says, for example, yesterday I got in an argument with my 17-year-old daughter, and she said, well, Academy Award nominee Joe Walker. All of a sudden, you see everybody laughing hysterically. He gets off stage. Denzel Washington wants to meet him. Sandra Bullock wants to meet him. Brad Pitt wants to meet him. Time magazine said it was one of the highlights of the Academy Awards. That's the power of connecting within 45 seconds. So the first way you get better at speaking is by watching a lot of speakers. The second way, one of my mentors was a guy named Jim Rohn, and Jim used to say, you can't pay other people to do your push-ups. Translation, you got to do the work. You got to get your reps in. So, you got to speak wherever you can speak. I mean, speaking on a podcast is great practice. You can speak to City Hall, the Chamber of Commerce, service organizations, schools, temples, churches, synagogues, whoever. And so Gustavo, who I was working with, he was going on a podcast that night. And I said, Gustavo, you got to practice. I want you to make the offer tonight, and I want you to call me tomorrow. He calls me the next day, Zarina. He's like, Danny, you're a genius. I'm like, did you go on the podcast? He's like, yes. I'm like, did you make your pitch? He's like, yes. I'm like, did you sell any? He's like, 23. Zarina, reading's my specialty, not math. If I'm doing my math correctly, he made $920,000 that night on an offer we had created that afternoon. And since then, he's made eight figures off of this presentation. And the reason I share that story is not because of his financial results, which are great. The reason I share the story is because he did it. Most people don't do. I mean, look at you, Zarina. How many of your friends are saying, "Oh, I'm going to do a podcast someday," but they never did a podcast? You actually did it. You were
I
actually
actually don't know anybody else who has a podcast. I mean, I know people
perfect.
have YouTube channels, but yeah.
They all talk. Most people talk. So you have better friends than I, because most of my friends, they talk, a bunch of ducks. They quack, but they don't do anything. And that's what I always tell. I guarantee you, Zarina, your very first podcast stunk. And your second one, it stunk, but it stunk a little bit less than the first one. And now you have a well-oiled machine. You're very comfortable. You know your format and everything. And it's the same with speaking. Speaking is a skill that can be taught. And I mean, I work with a lot of, most of the people I work with, they don't even want to speak. I'm showing them a way to get more clients. A lot of them have stage fright. They're nervous. We give them techniques on how to overcome that. And it really is the way you get better is just through that practice.
Yeah, actually, most of the people that I meet have a stage fright. I even read a book some time ago that said that that's the number one fear of Americans to speak in front of audience. Actually, worse than the fear of death.
Yeah.
Uh,
Jerry Seinfeld has a good line on that. He says that, so if you're ever at a funeral, more Americans would rather be in the coffin than delivering the eulogy. So it's a good line.
yeah, yeah, quite funny. Um, so when you train the people to speak, do you just help them prepare one particular presentation, one particular speech, or do you train them how to speak in general, how to express themselves, how to prepare for any situation? How does the engagement with you work?
Yeah, so we're preparing them for one specific presentation, but the formula, when they learn the formula works for anything. I mean, I have 50 different presentations based on the formula. I'll give you an example. In 2018, I was touring schools in India, and this one principal opens up a door, and there's 5,000 kids in an auditorium. There's like 20 newspapers, 5 TV stations, and the principal says, and now for the next hour, Dr. Brassell is going to teach us the 3 secrets to reading better. Zarina, nobody's told me I'm speaking, and I have no such speech. But I got 5,000 kids in media right there. And fortunately, it was India, so I get to speak slower. So I look at the kids, I'm like, today I am going to teach you the 3 secrets to reading better. Who wants to learn the 3 secrets to reading better? And the kids are going wild. And in my head, I'm thinking, what the heck are the 3 secrets to reading better? And using the exact same format that I teach my clients, within 30 seconds in my head, I put together a speech which formed the company you shared at the beginning in my introduction, which is now the top reading engagement program in the world. That was by using that same formula. So even though I'm teaching my clients one speech, I mean, I have, and my problem is once they're clients for life because I can't get rid of people. I love hearing their progress. I got one woman and she's probably got like 17 speeches now, and I tell her, I'm like, you only paid me for one. She's like, but you love me, Danny. I'm like, yes, that's the problem. But so she's used it. She's used the formula for it. She now has 17 different, and your presentations are different. I mean, that's what before we went on air, I said, well, who is your specific audience? I would have a specific talk for entrepreneurs, but that might be different than for women entrepreneurs specifically. I might have more examples with women in that one. Or if I'm looking at venture capitalists, well, there's a different type of format that I'm going to use. I'm going to use different type of anecdotes based on, like, I speak a lot in Canada. And so if I'm speaking to a male audience in America, I'll give them lots of American football examples. But if I'm speaking to a male audience in Canada, I'm going to use hockey examples because that's their sport. I'm trying to figure out Jerry Seinfeld again. There was a great American Express commercial maybe 20 years ago, and he's doing his stand-up routine in England, and nobody's laughing. And he's like, I got to learn the lingo. And so he takes his American Express card, he travels England, and then they show him a month later and he's dressed like a British guy and he's giving British jargon and everybody's laughing because you have to learn, okay, what makes people laugh, uh,
Yeah,
Austrian.
in a certain environment and
Yeah,
country and
absolutely.
culture.
Austrian audiences are different than Spanish
Oh yeah, for
audiences,
sure.
which are
Yeah.
different than French audiences. I mean, that's the great thing about Europe. You can literally drive 5 hours away and have an entirely different culture and different
Yeah, the
norms.
cultures are different, but I must say the sense of I've lived in 5 or 6 countries in Europe by now, and I pretty much think that the sense of humor is very similar everywhere. It's not that much. There's not a huge difference between Spain, the Netherlands, and Austria, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what when I'm showing people how to incorporate humor, to me, the easiest way to incorporate humor is don't make fun of other people. Always make fun of yourself. Everybody's going to love you the more you make. And if you watch the best comedians, that's what they do. Is Kevin Hart is a short black guy, so he makes a lot of jokes about being a short black guy. Jim Gaffigan is a big fat white guy, so he makes a lot of jokes about being a big fat white guy. You always have to when you take it yourself. I mean, that's what, like Shibaniker, when I was working with him, I said, okay, just make fun of, when I'm talking to people when they're very nervous, I'm like, well, just embrace that. Just say you're nervous, because this is what people don't understand. Audiences, you alluded to this, audiences are actually pretty cool. They want you to succeed. There's nothing worse than watching a person bomb on stage. It's very uncomfortable for everybody. You actually want to encourage that person. And so I tell people, if you're nervous, tell people you're nervous. They're going to love you for that.
Mhm. And despite all of these cultural differences and industry differences or whatever your audience is there a structure that people can follow that would lead them to the same wow result?
Absolutely. Yeah. So our process is the 5 C's. And so the very first C is clarity. And there's 2 questions you have to ask yourself before you ever put together your presentation. If you can answer these 2 questions, you're in good shape. 95% of the people I work with cannot answer one or both of them. They're very vague on these. So the 2 questions are this: who is the audience that you serve? Is the first one. A lot of people say, "Oh, my audience is everybody." I'm like, if your audience is everybody, your audience is nobody. The riches are in the niches. You want to get very specific. I was working with a woman a few months ago. She has the most amazing niche I've ever heard. She makes saddles for professional polo players. And I
Mm.
asked her, I said, Kathy, how much money do you make making saddles for professional polo players? And she's like, oh, about $800,000 last year. I'm like, I need to start learning how to make saddles for polo players. That's a great business. And so that's a very specific niche. Now, I'm not saying you can't expand your niche. I mean, like we'll use Kathy as the example. Start with speaking to polo players, but then you can expand to all equestrians, and then maybe women. You've touched women, so now you can speak with women. You can expand your audience. So the very first question is, who is your audience? The second question is, what is the problem that you solve? And most people make a mistake in the respect that they don't talk about the problem, they talk about their solution. So, for example, if I'm working with health and fitness instructors, I'm like, well, what's the problem that you solve? And they said, healthy eating. I'm like,
Mm.
well, healthy eating is a solution. That's not a problem. Obesity is a problem. Start phrasing it that way. I work with a lot of financial planners, and they'll say, creating a good retirement account. Well, that's a good thing. Having a healthy retirement's a good thing. Maybe the problem is making sure you have enough money to live until the day you die. That's the problem. So that's what you wanted to, and a lot of people you got to practice. I always tell people, instead of wasting your time on your phone, on social media, why don't you start practicing your pitch all the time? I mean, I practice my pitches for different presentations. People ask me, what do I do? I'm like, well, I empower leaders to transform their personal experiences into powerful business stories that inspire action, drive growth, and create lasting impact. That just flowed off my tongue. You know the reason it flowed off my tongue? I practice it 1,000 times. Every day, if I'm stuck waiting for something, I practice that line. I have other things that I'm practicing all the time. And so that's what I always encourage people to do. But before you write anything in your speech, you have to answer those questions. Those are the clarity questions. And then we get into connecting, which we already talked about. I mean, those first 5 minutes are key because your audience is making a decision. Am I going to be present for this presentation? Or am I going to be engaged, leaning in? And so here's a strategy I always share with my speakers is with your cell phone, stop pointing. You should film every talk and don't point the camera at you, point it at your audience. If you see your audience and they're all on their cell phones, you're boring. I mean, if you see your audience and they're all leaning in, well, that's something good. Like watch the audience. They give you all the feedback that you need. Most people watch themselves. I don't, Donald Miller has a great company called Story Brand. I agree with what he says is your job as the speaker is you're the guide and you have to make your audience the hero. You're Yoda and the audience is Luke Skywalker. You got to show them I can help guide you to where you want to go. And then we have the connection part of the presentation, the call to action, and the close. The content portion of the content portion of your presentation. I always tell people, ironically, it's the longest part of your presentation, and it's the least important because, and this is the professor in me, everything I do is based on research. If you want opinions, ask your Aunt Ethel. I'll tell you the research on why we're structuring the speech this way. The research shows us that people remember the beginning of your talk and the end of your talk, but they don't remember anything in between. Translation, the bun is more important than the burger. But a carefully crafted presentation during the content, what you do is you whisper sweet nothings to your audience as a strategy. I show people on what you want your audience to do without them realizing that you're actually alluding to what your offer is going to be. Besides, well, so the two biggest mistakes I see, Zarina, in presentations is that, first of all, people brag all the time. Um, I was working with a financial planner, Richard, and Richard, very successful. He started off his presentations like, I've been in the financial industry for 30 years. I've made my clients over $1 billion. I've worked with this famous person and this famous person. I said, Richard, time out. What are the three most important elements of real estate? Location, location, location. It's all right to brag, but you're doing it in the wrong part of your presentation. So we changed his opening. So now he talks about the very first client he got 30 years ago. And it's a hilarious story. It's a comedy of errors. He made every single mistake possible. I have no idea why this person invested their money with him. There's no way I would have trusted this guy. And this is the feedback he gave me, Zarina. He said that, so the way he gets clients is once or twice a week. He has about 15 married couples in their 50s that come to a steakhouse and they get a free steak dinner and they listen to his presentation. And he gave me this feedback. He said, Danny, the guy always used to go like this, like, what's he trying to sell me? And out of the 15 couples, he would get about, on average, about six of them would call for an appointment to find out more. Now that he's changed his story, he said the guy that used to have his arms like this is now patting his knee because he's laughing so hard, and he's increased his bookings from 6 to 12 of them are booking. And it's because he's connecting. He's showing them he's just like them. And and that's what I like is, Brene Brown, she's a wonderful speaker. She says you should talk about your own vulnerabilities. And I completely agree with her is stop talking about your successes, start talking about your failures, because not everybody in your audience has succeeded, but they've all failed. And the more you share your own failures, your own trials and tribulations, the more you're going to connect with them. They're going to love you. The second biggest mistake I see that most people make is they have multiple offers. They don't even realize that they have multiple offers. I share with you, I've been doing a whole bunch of podcasts just today. And a podcast I was on earlier, the gentleman at the end of the podcast said, and if hopefully you enjoyed this podcast, so make sure you like, subscribe, and give us a 5-star review. And after we went off air, I'm like, you just gave your audience 3 calls to action. They're not going to do any of them. Every time you give an extra choice, I always tell this, choices confuse and cause you to lose. You need to have one call to action. And it can be, it can be an unpaid call to action and be like, subscribe to my podcast or book a free phone call. It can be a paid offer like purchase my product or invest in my coaching program, but it has to be one. So this is very important. This is really one of the biggest mistakes I see most people make. And then, and Gustavo, like the financial thing for him making 40, that's completely, it blows me away because it's against all the research I've ever seen, because basically your audience, you kind of have to build up that trust. And so your offer has to be kind of correspondent to the amount of time you've engaged a person. So like if you just met a person in the elevator, you can't make them an offer for $40,000. And I would have said the same thing about a podcast, but Gustavo proved me wrong. Usually a $40,000 offer, in order to make that kind of pitch, you would have to be doing a summit for like 2 or 3 days where people are getting all kinds of great information from you. You're building that rapport and you're building that trust. So again, very long answer to your short.
It could have been a very large podcast with a huge audience, for example.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but in any case, it's still a great success.
Yeah, and that's what, so for the benefit of your audience, I love going on podcasts and people ask me why. I'm like, well, I'm getting practice all the time. And Coach Jimmy always yells at me. He's like, well, that podcast only has 100 subscribers. And I learned this when I was a journalist. It doesn't matter how many people are in the audience. All that matters is who is in the audience. Coach Jimmy and I, we don't work with everybody. We work with people that are pretty financially well off. This is our niche. I mean, I'm not working with, and there's other speaker coaches. I say, hey, go to this speaker coach. They'll charge you $500 to work with you. I mean, that's not the way we work at all. I mean, we work with some pretty high net worth individuals. I mean, which is fine. You need to have different, and this is why I gave a whole bunch of context to a coach the other day, and he looked at me. He's like, "Why would you do that? You're my competition." And I said, "Oh, well, that's where you and I differ. I have no competition. I only have potential collaborators. I mean, Zarina, you and I could do the exact same thing, and I'm going to make friends with you because not everybody wants to work with a white dude. Maybe they want to work with a woman in Austria. So I'm like, great, go work with Zarina. Zarina's in Austria. She's perfect for you. And the reason I do that is because I just believe that the world works itself out, and someday Zarina gets this. Oh, he really wants to work with a white dude in United States. Well, then you book him with me. That's how the world works. At least the world that I like to be a part of.
Do you think that with so many people going on podcasts, and podcasts are really proliferating in the past years? I don't know how many podcasts there are, millions,
Yeah, a couple million at
not
this.
billions, but millions.
Yeah.
Um, are people, is like the speaking trait wearing out, or is it still a valid thing to do? Because whenever I look at professional speakers, I do notice the patterns. I know what they're doing, right? So it could become kind of, I wouldn't say boring, but close to boring for the audience that is well educated, well aware of psychological tricks and what people are doing. Or do you find this doesn't matter? Even if they're using it, they can still connect to the speaker.
Yeah, I think if they use it, it's going to connect. I mean, there's just psychological principles that they're timeless. That I mean, we've been doing this for thousands of years. I mean, storytelling is just in our blood.
Yeah.
You know, cavemen, they would tell stories at the fire, and that's how stories are memorable. Of all people, it was Stalin who said a million dead is a statistic, one dead is a tragedy. Translation, facts tell, but stories sell. And so it's always about the story. Those are the things that people remember. They don't necessarily remember um, statistics and things like that. It was Walt Disney who said people think in pictures, and that's why when you're watching the news, a lot of people don't realize this all the time. Is if they're talking about if the news anchor is talking about a war, there's a picture of like an explosion in the corner, and the reason they're doing that is it's getting the person to realize, okay, this is a war story, and then they're talking about an elderly woman celebrating her 100th birthday, and there's a picture of a elderly woman with a birthday. The picture is what's sticking in your head. That's a simple exercise. Here, I'll do this with you right now. This will demonstrate the point. Is I want you to think of an apple. I'm going to give you 5 seconds. Think of it. Think of an apple, Serena. Okay, what did you think of? Describe what you thought of.
I thought of an apple that I have in the kitchen, which is red with a bit of yellow on top and at the bottom.
Perfect. Perfect. People say, "Oh, I thought of a Granny Smith apple, which is a green apple." People say, "I thought of a red delicious apple." I have people that say, "Oh, I thought of an Apple computer." Like, "Oh," or "I thought of an Apple iPhone." I'm like, "Oh, okay." But I have literally done this exercise with hundreds of thousands of people at this point. I've never once had a person say, "Oh, I thought of APPLE." They didn't think of the word because we think of pictures.
Oh, yeah, that's a funny one. Yeah. You have a few books behind you. Are these the two books that you wrote? Leadership Begins with Motivation and Misfit and Crackpots?
Yeah, these are the two latest ones I did. When I was a middle school teacher, I was the only teacher at my school that none of my students were tardy, and it's because I always started class by reading them a Paul Harvey story. So Paul Harvey, growing up when I was a kid, every day he'd be on the radio at 12:15 and he'd say, "I'm Paul Harvey with the rest of the story." And for 5 minutes, he's telling you a story about a person. You're trying to guess who it is, or maybe it's a company. And my students just love those stories. But the problem is, Paul Harvey, he died a couple of years ago at the age of 325 years old. And some his stories are about like people that a lot of kids today would not even know who they are, and companies they wouldn't know who they are. And so I wrote this book, Leadership Begins with Motivation, as an homage to him. And this book has stories about people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, and the kids love those. But then after I wrote this book, I read it, and I'm like, huh, completely unintentionally, most of the examples I gave in this book were of white male Americans. And so I wrote this book, Misfits and Crackpots, and most of the stories in this book are of women, minorities, and international people. And because I mean, and I have two daughters along with a son, but I'm like, kids need to hear stories about people from all over the place, those inspiring stories. And so, again, some people collect cars, some people collect stamps. I collect stories. I can't get enough of story. That's why I read all the time. I can read a horrible book, Zarina, but if there's one good story in there, it was worth there. Actually, I read a book a couple of weeks ago. It was a horrible book on marketing. And there was one story though, it was great. It was about so this guy, he's a marketer, he's traveling around the world trying to figure out what's the next big thing. What can I make a lot of money off of? And he just keeps on striking out. Well, he's in Chile and he's watching these fishermen, and he notices they're catching one type of fish, but there's another type of fish that gets in the nets. And so they put that in a different barrel. And he noticed they were eating that type of fish. And he said, "Oh, are you eating that fish because you're getting paid to catch these fish?" And they said, "Well, yes, but also it's actually a better tasting fish." And so he says, "May I try it?" And they're like, "Sure." So he tries. He's like, "Oh my gosh, this fish tastes so much better than the fish that you're getting paid to catch." He's like, "What's it called?" They're like, "The bonefish." He's like, "The bonefish? That's the worst name I thinks about it." He's like, "Oh." So he introduces it to restaurants in America, and it's now the number one selling fish at restaurants in America. He changed the name bonefish to the Chilean sea bass.
Oh,
And I
wow.
think that's a great story. It's the power
Yeah.
of marketing. How do you get people to buy into your idea? And so, yeah, that's what I love. And even my own children, they have to listen to me. I give them a story a day because I want them to have a library treasury trove of stories they can use.
Yeah. There's something that you mentioned in your short resume. It's an extensive resume, but the one that you published on Podmatch, it was about the connection between reading and speaking. Is it because you get enriched by various stories, or what is the reason that reading helps you speaking?
Well, that's what Zarina, you and I are both well traveled. A lot of people aren't well traveled. And I say, well, you don't need to be well traveled. All you need is a library card and go to the public library. And, a lot of people don't realize Jules Verne wrote Around the World in 80 Days without ever leaving France his entire life. I love reading people's with different perspectives. You know, I was giving a presentation among my many titles. I'm a visiting distinguished professor at the American University in Cairo. Say that 10 times fast. So
Yeah.
every time I go to Cairo, I like to speak to schools. And so several years ago, I spoke to this Muslim school. And I was kind of intimidated because I'm a Christian. I'm like, I've never spoken at a Muslim school. And so it was a parent training at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. 400 parents show up. All the guys have long beards, all the women are in burqas. And they were chatting with me like you and I are talking right now. And I basically said, shame on me. What was I thinking? And so I started off my talk. I said, well, I was reading this book the other day. Have any of you ever read the Quran? And they all start laughing. And I said, oh, well, then you know the story when the angel Gabriel appears in the cave to Muhammad. What's the first instruction the angel gives to Muhammad? Because the first pillar of Islam is to read. And so I looked at the parents. I said, so not only should we get your kids reading, it's actually written in your most sacred text. It's your responsibility to get your child reading. And I had 400 heads nodding in agreement. I'm like, holy cow. Who would have thought the Christian dudes' favorite audiences now are Muslims? I love speaking to Muslim schools. And the reason I was able to connect with them is I read the Quran. And I wouldn't have had that understanding of their culture. I mean, you and I have been talking about like you're talking about like you've lived in 5 different countries in Europe. I mean, there are little differences. I'm always trying to figure out what are those differences. Like what was it the Quentin Tarantino movie Inglorious Bastards? There's this great scene where the British are dressed as Nazis, and this British guy he says he wants 3 beers, and he holds up his 3 middle fingers like this, and that's how the German knows he's not German, is because a German
Mm.
would have done it in a different fashion. And I'm like, it's those little cultural nuances, but you pick that up. I pick it up by I love watching movies, I love reading books, I love hearing stories, I actually especially love stories from different cultures because uh, it gives me an edge because most Americans don't read those stories. I'm like, oh, I have a story for you that you've never heard. Because I'm addicted to watching. I watch like 10 speakers a day, and some people they just recycle stories that I've heard. Like
Mm.
I'm not gonna say. I was watching a guy. He's a billionaire, and he gave a 45-minute speech. He got paid $150,000 to give this 45-minute speech, where half of his examples I could tell you the other 20 speakers that use those stories, and the other half of
Yeah,
the
I
speech
know
was
what you mean. I know
yeah.
what you mean.
It's a
I've
no.
heard a lot of speakers that recycle examples also
uh,
from books that I've read on speaking and from, I don't know, like the most common personal development books that are out there.
Well, yeah,
Some
I mean,
stories. Yeah.
I used to belong to a secret society of speakers, and that was our common joke is we'd say, "Oh, have you told them the starfish story?" Because I've heard the starfish story a million times. Oh, yeah, I saw a little boy and he was tossing one starfish into the ocean at a time, but there was thousands on the beach, and his father said, "Are you making that? You're not making a difference. There's thousands." And he holds up the starfish and says, "It makes a difference to this one." And I've heard so many speakers give that same story. It drives me nuts, and that's why I like people to come up with their own stories. So I'm gonna. Kathy's in my head, my professional saddle maker for polo players. So
Mhm.
he was struggling on her call to action. And so I said, "Well, what do you want your audience to do?" And she says, "I want to convince them that they shouldn't do this themselves. They should hire an expert." I'm like, "Oh, okay, great. You need to hire an expert story." And so one of the strategies I teach my clients is I guarantee you'll have stories like this when you think about them. So here's the way so here's the story I gave her. I'm like, well, years ago, my wife and I had theater tickets. We were dressed to the nines, driving to the theater, and we got a flat tire. And my wife said, "I'm going to call the tow truck company." I'm like, "You don't have to call them. I'm a man. I can fix a flat tire." So I went to the back, I opened up the trunk, I got the spare tire, and then I got the pumper thing and the thing that's shaped like the X, and I was trying to get the nut things out, and I had grease all over me. I was a mess. 27 minutes later, I still hadn't fixed the flat tire. My wife is shaking her head like I could have done so much better than this guy. Well, unbeknownst to me, she had called a tow truck company. And this tow truck shows up, and some 17-year-old punk hops out of the tow truck, and in 3 minutes flat, he fixed the flat tire. You know, I think there are times in life when we always think that we can do it ourselves. But if you want to save time, you want to save money, and you want to save a whole lot of headache and embarrassment, you hire an expert. And so the reason I'm giving Kathy a story like that is yes, she wants her audience to buy her saddles, but she's going to use a story that has nothing to do with selling saddles, but it tells the story of this is why you hire an expert to do this. You have to have stories like that at your disposal. And so this fits in with what we were talking about at the beginning. A lot of people just tell stories just for the fact of a story. They're like, I want to connect. I'm going to tell a joke. The joke doesn't have anything to do with anything. I'm like, well, there needs to be a purpose behind these things. This is the structure that we're teaching people. And that's how you, I mean, like the Paco story I told you earlier. I had people like 20 years later, they remember the Paco story. And people remember stories. They don't remember, um, it was Maya Angelou who said, people, they're not going to remember the way the way that you're going to connect with people is how you make them how you make them feel. How do you get your audience? And that's why I like again, there's always that conflict, joy or tragedy. I made a decision years ago. I'm not going to be the tragedy guy. I just don't like that. And I'm not saying that nobody can do that. And actually, you can use tragic stories, in my opinion, as long as it has an American ending. This is the reason I watch American movies as opposed to French movies. When I
Yeah,
watch an American movie, if Julia Roberts dies in the middle of the movie, I know they're going to resuscitate her and she'll be alive by the end of the movie.
right.
In a French film, if they shoot Julia Roberts, I look at my wife, I'm like, I think she's dead. I don't think she's coming. I don't like that. That's sad. I like happy. And so you can do that if you're going to take your audience on an emotional roller coaster like that. But I want the audience to leave feeling good about themselves. I don't want them feeling like they're desperate.
Yeah. I mean, you made a complete circle now from the beginning, with the beginning of the presentation and now, or the talk rather, and the end. But before I let you go, we touched on the subject of how you adjust your speech for various audiences. But does it matter for the local presenters if they, for example, this question came from what you just said about the happy ending. Maybe the French like it without a happy ending. So
Yeah.
would you adjust your speech, or should a local speaker adjust it to their taste so that it has a dramatic ending?
No, that's a perfect question, Zarina. I appreciate that question. That goes right back to those two clarity questions. So that very first question I asked is, who is your audience? You need to know your audience. I mean, uh, if you like to curse during presentations and you're speaking at a church, I would advise you not to curse. It's going to offend half of your audience. But if you're speaking to like a bunch of guys in the Navy, they're going to go, oh, this is a great connection tool. So what you're trying to figure out is how do I connect with my audience? And so you're absolutely right. Again, my preference is not to have a sad ending. But I definitely see your point. If you believe that that's what's going to serve your audience best, I mean, and yeah, there's some subjects, if I'm talking about teenage suicide, I'm not going to give you a lot of funny stories about teenage. There's not
Mhm.
many funny stories about teenage suicide. It's going to be very serious. But again, I want to still end the presentation with hope. Um, I wouldn't end it with my teenager committed suicide and they're
Mhm.
gone. I would say something like. And I'd always use names. Names are very important. People remember the story better with a name. So, you know, Zarina was everything to my wife and me. And when we lost her, we decided we don't ever want another parent to go through what we went through. And so that's why we created the Zarina Foundation, and which shows teens why they need to live. And that's a happy ending about a sad subject, something like that. I'm always going to give it hope like that because yeah, there's some
Luckily,
subject.
I'm alive.
Yeah.
Danny, but thank you for using my name.
I know. Now people are going to remember, oh, what happened to poor Zarina? Well, should I listen to her podcast? Honored Zarina by listening to her podcast.
All right, and one very last question
Right,
before I let you go, because this wasn't very clear, and I like to leave things clear for myself and the audience as well.
right.
When you mentioned that you subliminally introduce the call to action, do you also explicitly say it at the end after the story?
No,
No.
no, never. And the subliminal ones in the content area, I call it whispering sweet nothings. So let's say my call to action is to enroll in my coaching program. When I'm doing my three teaching points, I'll say, Zarina is a person that enrolled in my coaching program years ago, and she found, and what I'm doing is I'm telling a story about you, but now, and this is the psychology. I get excited about this. Drives Coach
Mm.
Jimmy crazy. I get excited about this, but the psychology, what the research shows us, is now just by saying that Zarina enrolled in my coaching program, a person sitting there is like, huh. Danny has a coaching program. I wonder who he coaches. I wonder if he'd coach me. I wonder how much that coaching program cost. And so what you're doing is you're whispering these sweet nothings so that by the time you make your call to action, people in the audience is like, oh, I'm so excited. He's making an offer for coaching. Whereas most people, what they're trying to do is push you to get whatever they want by whispering these sweet nothings during the content portion of your presentation. Now they're like trying to get it out of you. Oh, please, please, please make me an offer. It's a totally different type of psychology, and it's much more ethical. If you're going to read a book on the ethics of sales, I encourage everybody in the audience to read the book Influence by Robert Cialdini. It shows you all kinds of great ethical studies on how to ethically get your audience to take that next step. You don't have to manipulate your audience. To me, it's just sleazy. I mean, I used to go to infomercials. There was this one guy. He had his hair slicked back using a fancy suit. And he says, there are two types of people in this world, good, hardworking people and rich people. And I'm like, ugh. gosh, this is such a sleazy line, but I love watching. I learn from everybody. And this is why I tell people it's just as important to learn what you don't want to do as it is to what you do want to do. So as long as, yeah, so that's the power of that. But you don't have to if you framed your call to action properly. To me, the very end, the close of your presentation is the fireworks. This is to get people rushing to the door. Oh my gosh, I need to get whatever Zarina is selling. This is great. I need to be part of this community. And again, it doesn't have to be a paid offer, but you do. One of my mentors, Zig Ziglar, towards the end of his life, he did research on the impact that he was having on his audiences. And out of every 100 letters he had received, he didn't realize only one of those 100 was talking about the impact that his presentation had. The other 99 were about his coaching programs and his books and his products, his cassette tapes and things like that. And he's like, wow, I didn't realize, you have me speak to you for an hour, I can have a little bit of an impact, but if you have me coach you, I can have a lot of impact for you. And
Are
so
you
that's
telling me
why.
you were coached by Zig Ziglar? I have his book here behind. See you
Oh,
at
he's great.
yeah.
He has one of the he had one of the best endings ever to a so his best-selling book, his first best-selling book was called See You at the Top.
That's the one I have. Yeah.
So the ending, oh, gosh, if I could ever create an ending like this, such a great ending to his presentation. He's like, a lot of us, we're in boats and we go over those rough waters of entrepreneurship. And a lot of us, we want to go down below deck, but I'm told, no, you can't do that. You'll feel ill. You do that. The way you got to look up. Believe me, all of us are going to have problems, but believe me, if you look up, I will see you at the top. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you end your presentation with the title of your book. It's the greatest ending I've ever seen. And I love watching him speak. That's a great, and he's funny. I mean, he, again, he just shows you the power of humor throughout a presentation. Jim Rohn, same way. He shows you the power of humor throughout a presentation. And again, they don't have to be stand-up comedians. They just got to get you nodding and smiling and laughing. And so hopefully I helped you and your audience, Serena. As a
Oh my
thank
God, I had so much fun. And
Oh, you're
yeah.
great. Well, as a thank you, I wanted to give everybody a freebie. So if you go to freestoryguide.com, again, free story guide, like a tour guide, freestoryguide.com, I'm going to give everybody their own free blueprint to storytelling, their well-crafted story. So what this is I'm going to show you exactly what I take my clients through on how to create their well-crafted story. What this does for you is it takes the guesswork out of putting together a presentation and shows you the actual strategies you need to create a well-crafted presentation. And what this means for you is the peace of mind that you're having a greater impact on the world and making the income and building up the clientele that you want. You can get that at freestoryguide.com. And again, Zarina, thank you so much for having me. I just really appreciate you, and anything I can do to promote your good work, I am all in.
Danny Brassell, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot, and I'm going to go to your website to get this blueprint. Thank you for listening to Grow and Learn. We hope that you found our podcast informative, engaging, and inspiring. Our mission is to help you keep growing and learning, and we hope that our conversations and insights have provided you with practical advice and useful perspectives. If you're looking for personalized support and guidance to help you achieve your personal or professional growth objectives, I offer a range of services to help. As a trusted management partner and mentor, I work with businesses in the process of transformation, looking for new streams of business as well as M&A. With an extensive professional network of experts and mentors, I can bring on board the right person or team based on the specific needs of the company I'm working with. To learn more about the services I offer and how I can help you achieve your goals, visit my website at grownlearn.org. You can also reach out to me via email or social media. I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this episode of Grow and Learn, please subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review. Your feedback is important to us, and it helps us to continue to create content that is relevant and valuable to our listeners. Thanks again for listening, and we look forward to sharing more insights and perspectives with you in the future.